The year was 1851, and the air in rural Georgia hung thick with dust and the scent of cotton. Fields stretched like blistered parchment beneath the burning sun, and in the middle of it all stood the Langston plantation, a house painted white but soaked in red. Its columns reached skyward like the arms of a lie, pristine and proud, while behind it, in its long shadow, crouched rows of slave cabins, sagging, smoky, and alive with quiet sorrow. Benjamin lived in the third cabin from the end, 26 years old, skin dark as churned soil, muscles carved by years of toil but eyes that refused to dull. Born into bondage, Benjamin had never tasted freedom. He had never seen a train or touched a silver spoon, but somewhere deep behind his sternum something still stirred. Not hope, no, that had been beaten out of most by the time they could walk. What lived in Benjamin was older, quieter, a slow, burning rage that had a long memory. His father had died when Benjamin was 8, flogged for not bowing fast enough when the master passed by. His mother followed 2 years later, hung by her wrists in the smokehouse for stealing a handful of cornmeal to quiet Benjamin's growling stomach. Benjamin had watched her bleed, and he had learned the lesson the lash meant to teach: you are nothing but breath and bone and labor. But Benjamin remembered. He remembered everything. Every morning the bell rang before the sun lifted its head. Feet slapped dirt, chains clinked, and bodies moved toward the field like shadows summoned by whip crack. Overseer Gerald, a man with a jaw like a cleaver and hands that twitched at his hip where his whip coiled, watched with the same delight others reserved for sport. He called it order. The master called it God's plan. Benjamin called it survival. In the fields under the lash, Benjamin bent and picked and carried and bled. The cotton cut into his fingers like little white razors, and the Georgia heat seeped into his spine like fire. Men fainted, women miscarried. Children learned to keep pace or be dragged behind. The overseers watched for signs of defiance, too slow, too proud, too quiet, and punished with practiced cruelty. Yet somehow, even among this, there were tiny rebellions. Benjamin led the others in songs, low and pulsing, heavy with hidden meaning. They weren't just hymns, they were maps, they were memories, they were messages in rhythm. At night when the cabins creaked and the whip slept in its coil, Benjamin taught the children how to keep their heads bowed but their minds sharp. He showed them how to carve little notches in the beams, marks of days survived. He whispered to them about the river, the north, the stars. A man can be owned in body but not in fire, he once told a boy who cried after his first lashing. That boy never cried again, but the world around them had no patience for embers. Master Edmund Langston was a man who smiled like a blade. He believed in order, discipline, and the righteous hand of God, and saw himself as the extension of all three. He had built his fortune on backs like Benjamin's, and he defended it with iron and gospel. He was not new to blood. Slaves had died on Langston land before, flogged, starved, hung. One had tried to run and was returned with his feet gone. Another had raised a hand once, and was flayed so viciously that the trees behind the smokehouse still wept sap in spring. The message was clear: obedience or obliteration. And yet the whisper remained, from cabin to cabin, from mouth to ear, passed in broken words and stifled breath. A quiet phrase, repeated like prayer when no one could hear: better to die free than live bound. Benjamin never said it aloud, but when he heard it, sometimes behind him in the field, sometimes while tending cuts at night, his fists clenched and the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, it was something sharper. He watched, he remembered, he waited. And while cotton bloomed and backs broke, while the master sipped brandy and the overseer played God, Benjamin burned. Not in fury. In purpose it began with a lie. The scales in the weighing shed read light, 10 pounds less than what the overseer expected. Benjamin had picked with the same hands under the same sun, on the same aching legs as every other day. But when the cotton sack was poured out, the numbers betrayed him. Overseer Gerald didn't speak right away. He just stared, eyes narrow, lips curled with the slow pleasure of power. Then in front of the others he hissed, "Trying to cheat the master, are ya?" Benjamin stood silent, jaw tight. He could have argued, could have said the scale was off, could have mentioned the broken strap on his sack, could have pointed out that the weight was near exact yesterday, but he did none of those things. He met Gerald's eyes, not with rage, with refusal to kneel, to flinch, to beg. And in that moment, Gerald saw not a slave, but a man who knew what dignity was. That was unforgivable. By the time the sun slipped behind the trees, they had gathered everyone in the clearing beside the smokehouse. The punishment pole stood crooked and splintered, stained by the ghosts of old pain. The other slaves were herded into a circle, men, women, children. No one was spared the sight. That was the point. Benjamin was dragged forward, shirt ripped, wrists tied to the pole above his head, ankles spread, feet bare in the red dust. The overseer stepped back and uncoiled the whip like it was part of him. "Let this be a lesson," Gerald barked, but no one needed the lesson. They already knew the price of standing too tall. The first strike screamed across Benjamin's back. A line of fire bloomed, flesh tore, blood burst in tiny arcs. He grunted but did not cry out. The second lash found the same path, deepening it, skin peeled like bark. The whip's tip curled around his side, tearing at his rib. The third came lower, then another, and another. 12, 20, 30, the sound of it leather on flesh was something unnatural, like a horse's death cry, like thunder striking bone, the kind of sound that silenced birds and made children weep. But no one moved, they watched, silent, eyes wide, mouths shut. Mothers clutched their little ones to their skirts. Men clenched fists behind their backs, teeth grinding. A boy whimpered before his sister hushed him, shaking. Because to speak, to plead, would be to join him, and yet Benjamin endured. His head sagged, blood dripping from his chin, ribs slick with red, but he did not beg, he did not scream. He bit down on pain like it was meat and fed on it. Each strike became less a punishment and more a ritual, one that carved his purpose deeper than any sermon ever could. By the 40th lash, the whip had exposed tendon. His back looked like raw meat hung to cure. The overseer, panting now, paused only to spit tobacco and smile. Benjamin's knees buckled. The ropes held him aloft, his vision blurred, but his mind was never clearer. In that pulsing agony he saw a future, a knife, a throat, a final breath that would not be his. He would not die like this. "You ain't breaking me," he whispered. The words were lost in the dust. Gerald struck once more high near the shoulder and leaned in. "That'll teach you." Benjamin coughed, blood on his tongue, and though his lips barely moved, he smiled, not out of madness, but out of promise. They cut him down an hour later and tossed him behind the cabins like a sack of spoiled cornmeal. No one dared speak. But as night fell, one by one, the others crept to him, bringing water, cloth, herbs. The old woman with clouded eyes muttered prayers in a language older than chains. Children kept watch while others worked. Benjamin said nothing. His body trembled, but his heart beat steady. He wasn't waiting to die, he was waiting to heal. Because somewhere deep in the swamp of his mind, a vow had taken root. "He flogged the skin from my bones. One day I will slit the breath from his throat." The night after the flogging, Benjamin didn't sleep. He lay in the dirt behind the cabins, every breath a furnace. His back oozed blood and pus. Flies hovered, pain pulsed through him like drumbeats. But in the stillness, when no one else dared to speak, he heard her footsteps. Mama Adira, they called her that. Nobody knew if she was 80 or 100. Her face was a map of lines and secrets. She carried a little pouch around her neck, and her eyes saw through shadows. She knelt beside him without a word, peeled back his torn shirt, and began to work. She packed the wounds with herbs that stung, with crushed root and leaf from plants that didn't grow in any white man's garden. As she worked, she whispered, not in English but in something older, something that made the wind hush and the trees lean closer. "Your blood carries memory, child. What they cut from your back, your ancestors will return in fire." Benjamin groaned, but not in pain, in recognition. Each night she came again. Each night she treated his wounds in silence, and each night she whispered more. "He took from you, but you ain't empty, you are waiting." It took 3 weeks for him to stand straight again. 3 weeks of hiding his wounds beneath rags, of moving slow to avoid suspicion. 3 weeks of watching, listening, planning. In the deep hush of midnight, when even the owls slept, Benjamin began to map the plantation in his mind. The master's habits were routine. Every night after supper, Edmund Langston walked alone from the big house to his detached study, a small brick room filled with ledgers, keys, and bourbon. He'd stay an hour, drinking, sometimes muttering scripture to himself. Then he'd stumble back to the main house through the dark garden across the narrow stone path. Benjamin timed it. 27 steps. 1 full minute. Always alone. The kitchen door, too, was rarely locked. The white servants were careless, confident. A long, wooden-handled carving knife sat on the rack above the hearth, used to gut hogs and peel squash. Benjamin stared at that knife every time he passed the kitchen window. Its blade gleamed like a prophecy. Word spread among the slaves. Not spoken aloud, but passed in glances, gestures, half-sentences. "Benjamin, he ain't just healing. Don't let him do it. Please God, he'll bring hell on us all. One man, older with a limp from an old chain break, grabbed Benjamin by the arm one night and hissed, "They'll hang every one of us. They'll burn us alive." "Please let the anger go." Benjamin looked at him. "I let it go once when they killed my mother, and once again when they whipped my father. It won't be a third time." The man lowered his eyes. "Then we'll pray for a quick end." Benjamin wasn't looking for prayers. He was looking for thunder. It came 2 nights later. The storm rolled in slow and hungry, dragging black clouds like a shroud across the Georgia sky. Thunder cracked like war drums. Rain came in sheets, soaking the cotton fields, turning the dirt to blood-colored mud. Benjamin stood in the doorway of the cabin, shirt clinging to his chest, bandages damp and red. Lightning flashed behind him, etching his silhouette against the storm. He didn't move like a man. He moved like a promise kept too long. Inside the cabin, children whimpered. A woman clutched her baby and turned her face to the wall. No one stopped him. They knew the hour had come. Mama Adira met him halfway between the cabins and the woods. She placed something into his hand, a small woven talisman shaped like a bird. "For your spirit," she whispered. "Will I need it?" he asked. "If the sky swallows you, yes. If not, pass it on." Then she stepped aside. The lightning lit his path. His feet made no sound. The plantation, usually so loud with suffering, was silent as if the land itself held its breath. He moved toward the big house, toward the drunken master, toward the blade, toward the reckoning. The storm had passed, but its rage remained. The air was wet and heavy, hanging over the Langston plantation like a soaked curtain. Rain still dripped from the trees in the orchard, and the wind had quieted, but the world felt. Waiting, tense, like something was about to snap. Benjamin moved like smoke between the buildings, barefoot, silent. The mud sucked at his feet, but he didn't pause. His breath was steady. His hands no longer trembled. He wore no coat, no hat. Just the same torn shirt, still damp from sweat and healing blood. In one hand, he gripped the carving knife, long, curved, worn from years of peeling hogs and splitting marrow. Its weight surprised him. It felt good, not heavy, not foreign. It felt earned. The kitchen had been empty, just like he knew it would be. The house servants had gone to their quarters. The master had taken his bourbon to the study, and now, as always, would be asleep in his bedroom, alone, drunk, and vulnerable. Benjamin slipped through the side door. The great house was too quiet. Floorboards groaned like old slaves beneath boots. The walls were lined with portraits of men who had killed and conquered and called it legacy. Their painted eyes watched him pass. He didn't blink. Up the narrow stairs, past the study door, past the parlor, to the far end where a single oil lamp flickered beneath the crack of a thick oak door, the master's quarters. Benjamin pressed his hand to the door. Inside, he heard snoring, slow, gurgled, uneven, the kind of snore that came from deep in the gut. From a man who never had to sleep lightly, a man who had never feared anything in his life. Benjamin turned the knob. The door opened with a creak. He stepped inside. The room was wide and warm. A fire burned low in the hearth. Heavy curtains blocked the moonlight. The bed stood high, draped in white cotton and velvet like a throne. And there, sprawled across it, lay Master Edmund Langston. Even in slumber, he looked arrogant. One hand draped over the edge, fingers twitching with dreams. A bottle of bourbon tipped near his hip. His mouth hung open, jowls slack, lips wet with drool. He wore a silk nightshirt. His feet were bare. His chest rose and fell, as if the world would always bow to his breathing. Benjamin stared at him, and for a moment, just a flicker, he hesitated, not from mercy, from weight. The weight of what this moment would mean. He remembered the screams of his mother, the way his father's body twisted as the rope pulled taut. He remembered the whip, the burn, the silence of the others, the way the blood ran down his spine and into the soil like it had somewhere to be, and then he remembered the vow. "One day I will slit the breath from his throat." Benjamin stepped forward. He raised the knife. His hand trembled not from fear but from release. From carrying too many years in silence. From generations behind him whispering now, he leaned in, pressed the cold blade to Edmund Langston's throat, just beneath the jawline where the pulse beat slow and stupid. Langston stirred. His eyes fluttered open. Benjamin met them. For a second there was confusion, then recognition. Then terror. "You," that was all he managed. The knife moved in one smooth, final stroke. A red line opened across the master's neck. Blood surged in a hot arc, spraying the sheets, the wall, Benjamin's hands. Langston gurgled, clutched his throat, kicked once, then stopped. His eyes froze wide, his mouth twitched and fell still. Silence. Benjamin stood there, blood on his face, chest heaving. The room smelled of iron and smoke. The fire popped. The rain began again, soft now, like it was washing the moment clean. He dropped the knife. Then he ran down the stairs, through the kitchen, into the yard. His feet splashed in mud and blood alike. Dogs howled in the distance. A light flickered in the overseer's cabin, too late. By the time chaos broke, shouts, bells, dogs loosed, Benjamin was gone. He vanished into the trees, into the swamp, into the misted world beyond the fields where no cotton grew and no master ruled. They found the body at dawn. Edmund Langston, patriarch of the Langston plantation, lay in a pool of blood in his fine bed, mouth open in a final gasp of disbelief. The slaves were lined up and beaten for information. None spoke. The overseers screamed, searched, threatened, but Benjamin was gone and something had changed. The house no longer felt powerful. The fields no longer seemed silent. Even the whip felt lighter, less sure in the overseer's hands, because something had been broken. Not just a man. A system, a myth. It wasn't just a murder. It was liberation, the kind that bled loud like a scream from every back ever scarred. And the knife hadn't just cut flesh. It had cut history. The swamps took him in like kin. Benjamin ran with blood still warm on his hands, the master's death still steaming in the master's bed. Behind him, the dogs howled, sharp and hungry. The overseers shouted. Torches danced like angry ghosts through the night trees. But the woods did not betray him. He knew these backwoods like he knew scars on his back. The moss-covered trees, the hush of the reeds, the slither of snakes and the breath of frogs. He knew where the marsh turned shallow and where it would swallow a horse whole. While the patrols thundered in circles, Benjamin moved like smoke through the cypress. For days he disappeared into the green, drinking from muddy creeks, eating stolen roots, pressing his torn shirt to his still healing wounds. He slept in the forks of trees, wrapped in wet leaves, rain on his face. And every time thunder cracked or a branch snapped under boot, his eyes snapped open, ready to run or fight or vanish. But he never cried. Not once. Every step he took away from the plantation was a prayer made in silence, and a gamble with death. By the fifth night, the hounds had stopped. The patrols gave up when the rains washed the scent away. Benjamin stayed hidden anyway. He knew better than to trust silence. He crouched in the hollow of a rotting oak, pressing his hand to the pouch Mama Adira had tied to his belt, her little bird woven from twine and bone. "If the sky swallows you, this'll guide your spirit home," she'd said. He didn't know if home meant freedom or death. Maybe they were the same. He dreamed of the North sometimes. Of railroads and lantern signals and white folks who didn't see his skin as a curse. He imagined snow and shoes and sitting in a room where no one owned him. But the road to the North was long, and the bounty on his head grew by the day. Some said $500. Others said more. "Wanted for murder," the posters read. No, not murder, revenge. Back on the plantation, the world moved slower, darker, quieter. The white folks boarded up the study and burned the master's mattress. The overseers became crueler but also jumpier. They flinched at shadows, they double-locked their doors, and the slaves, they worked as before, but something had changed. In the hush of evening, they gathered behind the cabins, in corners and kitchens. In broken whispers and quick glances, they told a story. He didn't run, he struck. Benjamin slit the devil's throat. He bled for us, and then he disappeared like thunder. The children began scratching a new mark on the wood beams. A crooked line, sharp and clean. They called it the cut, not a scar, a symbol, a reminder. Some said Benjamin made it to the river, where a black preacher ferried him across in a hollowed log. Others swore he was shot by a patrol and buried beneath the roots of a hickory tree near the border of South Carolina. A few whispered that he never left, that he watched from the trees, always nearby, a ghost with a blade. But no one really knew, and maybe that was the power of it. He became more than a man. He became a legend, a name that burned in the minds of the oppressed, a story passed from mother to child, from elder to youth, a tale told in fear and in hope. Because if one slave could rise, maybe another could follow. In time, the story faded from white memory. The Langstons moved on. The plantation sold, the fields replanted, the blood washed clean from the floors, but the land remembered, the trees remembered. And in the cabins, those rotting frames that once held prayers and pain, his name lived on, not as a monster, not even as a martyr, but as a match struck in darkness. In the year 1851, the soil of Georgia drank the blood of both master and slave. But one death was justice, and one life became legend. What would you have done if you were Benjamin, if the lash tore your skin, but your soul still burned with fire? Have you ever carried a pain so deep it turned into purpose? If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the strength, the suffering, and the spirit our ancestors carried, then honor their memory. Like this video, comment below what does justice look like to you? And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of resistance, legacy, and Black history they tried to erase.